Russia, a land of mystery, power, and resilience. A nation whose history is marked by epic battles, legendary rulers, and ideological revolutions that shaped the world. How did a collection of Slavic tribes evolve into the largest country on Earth? What forces forged its imperial ambitions, and what events led to its most devastating collapses? From the mighty czars of the Russian Empire to the rise and fall of the Soviet Union, Russia's past is a story of survival, ambition, and transformation. But the echoes of history still shape the present. Conflicts, revolutions, and power struggles continue to define Russia's role on the global stage. In this documentary, we journey through thousands of years of Russian history, uncovering the secrets of its rise and the lessons hidden within its turbulent past. The answers may shock you. Russia's origins stretch deep into the past, long before it became the vast empire we recognize today. In the early centuries, the land was inhabited by scattered Slavic tribes, living in dense forests and along great rivers. These tribes had no central authority, engaging in trade, agriculture, and frequent skirmishes. But did you know that the foundation of Russia wasn't entirely Slavic? A significant part of its early formation was influenced by the arrival of the Varangians, a group of Norse warriors and traders who ventured south from Scandinavia. According to the primary chronicle, a key historical text, the Slavs invited the Varangians to bring order to their fragmented lands. This is where the legendary figure Rurik comes in. Around 862 AD, Rurik established his rule in Novgorod, laying the foundation for what would later become Kievan Rus, the first major Slavic state. His dynasty, the Rurikids, would rule Russia for centuries. By the late 9th century, Kievan Rus, with its capital in Kiev, flourished as a powerful federation, linking the trade routes between Europe and the Byzantine Empire. This newfound wealth brought cultural and political advancements, but it also made the region a target for external threats. While Kievan Rus expanded, its rulers faced the challenge of unifying their people under a single cultural and religious identity. That decision would come soon, one that would forever define Russian civilization. A pivotal moment in Russian history arrived in 988 AD when Prince Vladimir the Great made a decision that would change the nation's identity forever. He converted Kievan Rus to Christianity. But why did a pagan ruler abandon the gods of his ancestors? Was it purely a spiritual awakening, or was there a deeper motive behind it? The answer lies in politics and diplomacy. The Byzantine Empire, a dominant power of the medieval world, was deeply Christian and held vast cultural and military influence. Vladimir saw an opportunity to strengthen his kingdom by forging an alliance with Constantinople. In exchange for converting to Christianity, he secured marriage to Princess Anna, the sister of the Byzantine Emperor Basil II. This alliance provided military aid and reinforced Vladimir's power, ensuring the stability of Kievan Rus. But conversion wasn't a simple process. The mass baptism of the people of Kiev, as described in historical chronicles, was a dramatic event. Pagan temples were destroyed, idols were cast into the rivers, and the entire population was ordered to embrace Orthodox Christianity. The shift was monumental. It transformed art, law, education, and even the political structure of the state. Churches with Byzantine-style domes emerged across the land, and Orthodox traditions became deeply embedded in Russian culture. However, while Kievan Rus thrived under its new Christian identity, a dark storm was brewing in the east. A force unlike any other was about to descend upon the Slavic lands, bringing fire, destruction, and centuries of oppression. The Mongols were coming. The year is 1237, and a terrifying shadow looms over the Russian lands. From the distant steppes of Mongolia, the most fearsome empire in history was marching westward, the Mongols. Led by Batu Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, the Mongols descended upon Kievan Rus with an unstoppable force. But what made their invasion so devastating? The Mongol army was unlike anything the Slavs had ever encountered. Highly organized, ruthlessly disciplined, and masters of psychological warfare, they moved swiftly across the Russian plains. City after city fell. In 1240, Kiev, the heart of Kievan Rus, was reduced to ashes. Its grand churches, once symbols of faith and strength, were desecrated. The Mongols massacred entire populations, and those who survived were forced into submission. This marked the beginning of the Tatar-Mongol yoke, a period of over 2 centuries where Russian lands were ruled under Mongol dominance. The Mongols didn't directly govern. They imposed crushing tributes, demanding gold, resources, and even people for their vast empire. Any resistance was met with brutal retaliation. But despite the destruction, Mongol rule had unexpected consequences. They introduced military strategies, centralized governance, and trade connections that would later shape Russia's development. Yet, while many Slavic principalities remained under Mongol control, a new power was rising in the north. A city that would one day become the heart of Russian resistance, Moscow. But could a small settlement in the forests ever challenge the might of the Mongol Empire? In the 14th century, while much of Russia remained under Mongol control, a once insignificant settlement began to grow in power, Moscow. But how did this isolated city, surrounded by dense forests, transform into the future capital of a vast empire? The key lay in its rulers. The princes of Moscow, starting with Ivan I, known as Ivan Moneybags, understood that survival meant cooperation. Instead of openly rebelling, Ivan cleverly worked with the Mongols, collecting taxes on their behalf. This made Moscow immensely wealthy and, more importantly, politically influential. Gradually, Moscow became the most powerful of all Russian principalities. However, the real turning point came under the rule of Dmitry Donskoy. In 1380, against all odds, he led the Russian forces to victory over the Mongols at the Battle of Kulikovo. It was the first major defeat of the Mongols in Russian territory, a moment that sparked hope across the land. Though the Mongols would retaliate, the battle proved that their grip on Russia was weakening. As Moscow continued to grow in wealth and power, one question loomed: could it finally break free from Mongol rule forever? The answer would come with a leader who would reshape Russia's destiny, a man remembered as Ivan the Great. For nearly 250 years, the Mongols ruled over Russian lands, demanding tribute and crushing rebellions. But in the 15th century, a new leader emerged, Ivan III, known to history as Ivan the Great. Unlike his predecessors, he wasn't content with merely collecting taxes for the Mongols. He had a vision: a unified, independent Russia, free from foreign rule. But could he truly break the Mongol yoke? Ivan III expanded Moscow's influence, absorbing neighboring territories and consolidating power. His most daring move came in 1480. The Mongols, led by Ahmed Khan, marched towards Moscow to enforce their dominance. But this time, something was different. Ivan III refused to pay tribute. At the Ugra River, the two armies faced off in what became known as the Great Stand on the Ugra River. No battle was fought. After days of tense standoff, the Mongols withdrew. It was the symbolic end of Mongol rule over Russia. With the Mongols gone, Ivan III declared himself Tsar of all Rus and reshaped Moscow into the Third Rome, positioning it as the heir to the fallen Byzantine Empire. He strengthened the Kremlin, introduced centralized governance, and laid the foundation for the Russian state. But Ivan's ambitions would pale in comparison to those of his grandson, a ruler whose name still strikes fear into the hearts of many. A man known as Ivan the Terrible. In 1547, a 16-year-old ruler did something no Russian leader had done before. He crowned himself Tsar of all Russia. His name was Ivan IV, but history remembers him as Ivan the Terrible. At first, he was a reformer, expanding Russia's borders, modernizing the army, and strengthening the state. But over time, something dark began to consume him. Plagued by paranoia, Ivan created the Oprichnina, a secret police force dressed in black, riding black horses, and carrying the emblem of a dog's head, a symbol of their loyalty and mercilessness. They carried out brutal purges, slaughtering entire families suspected of treason. No one was safe, not even the nobility. In a fit of rage, Ivan even killed his own son and heir, leaving Russia in crisis. Despite his cruelty, Ivan's reign had lasting effects. He expanded Russia's territory, defeating the powerful khanates of Kazan and Astrakhan. He also established trade with England, opening Russia to European commerce. But his reign of terror left Russia weakened, setting the stage for a period of chaos known as the Time of Troubles. As Russia plunged into anarchy, the throne was empty, pretenders fought for power, and foreign invaders loomed. But from this darkness, a new dynasty would rise, one that would rule Russia for over 300 years, the Romanovs. After the death of Ivan the Terrible in 1584, Russia was left vulnerable. His son, Fyodor I, was weak and ineffective, leaving real power in the hands of Boris Godunov, a cunning but unpopular advisor. When Fyodor died without an heir in 1598, Russia spiraled into chaos. The period that followed would test the very survival of the Russian state. It became known as the Time of Troubles. Without a clear ruler, factions fought for power. A series of false claimants, known as the false Dmitris, emerged, each pretending to be Ivan the Terrible's long-lost son. Meanwhile, famine gripped the land, wiping out a third of the population. But the greatest danger came from outside. Polish and Swedish forces invaded, seeking to claim Russia for themselves. Moscow was even occupied by Polish troops in 1610. With foreign armies controlling their capital and internal strife tearing the country apart, Russia seemed doomed. But something remarkable happened. Ordinary citizens, led by a merchant named Kuzma Minin and a prince named Dmitry Pozharsky, organized a volunteer army. In 1612, this people's militia drove the Poles out of Moscow, reclaiming the heart of Russia. But the question remained: who would lead Russia? The country needed a strong dynasty, one that could bring stability. And in 1613, the Zemsky Sobor, a grand national assembly, made its choice: a 16-year-old boy named Michael Romanov. The Romanov dynasty was born, and it would change Russia forever. With Michael Romanov on the throne in 1613, Russia finally had stability, but it was still a fragile state. Over the next century, the Romanovs worked tirelessly to rebuild and expand the empire. The real transformation, however, began with one man, a ruler who would drag Russia into the modern world: Peter the Great. Peter was not a typical Russian Tsar. He was fascinated by the West, its technology, its ships, and its military. He embarked on a daring journey across Europe, learning shipbuilding in the Netherlands and studying modern warfare in Prussia. When he returned, he was determined to modernize Russia. He built a powerful navy, reformed the army, and introduced Western customs, even forcing noblemen to shave their beards. But his greatest achievement was the construction of a new capital, St. Petersburg. Built on swampy land near the Baltic Sea, it became Russia's window to the West, a symbol of its growing power. But as Russia modernized, tensions between the nobility and the common people grew. While the Romanovs expanded their empire, they also tightened control over the peasantry, solidifying serfdom. Millions of Russian peasants became little more than slaves, bound to their land and their noble masters. The Romanov dynasty would continue to shape Russia, but its power came at a cost. A storm was brewing among the people, and one day, the empire they built would come crashing down. Russia had seen great rulers before, but none quite like Catherine the Great. She wasn't even Russian. Born a German princess, she married into the Romanov dynasty and, after a palace coup in 1762, seized the throne. What followed was a reign that transformed Russia into one of the most powerful empires in the world. Catherine was a visionary. She expanded Russia's borders, defeating the Ottoman Empire and securing access to the Black Sea. She also played a key role in the partitioning of Poland, erasing an entire country from the map while strengthening Russian influence in Europe. But Catherine wasn't just a conqueror, she was also a patron of the arts and an advocate for Enlightenment ideas. She corresponded with Voltaire and Diderot, bringing Western philosophy to Russia. She reformed education, built libraries, and even sought to improve the rights of serfs, though in reality, serfdom became even harsher under her rule. Yet, for all her success, her reign wasn't without challenges. The Pugachev Rebellion, the largest peasant uprising in Russian history, threatened to destroy her empire. Led by a former Cossack, the rebels claimed to fight for the people, demanding freedom from noble oppression. Catherine crushed the rebellion with brutal force, making it clear Russia would remain under absolute rule. Under Catherine, Russia became a true European powerhouse. But as the empire grew in size and influence, so did the contradictions within it, an empire of both enlightenment and oppression. And these contradictions would only deepen in the centuries to come. By the early 19th century, Russia was a dominant force in Europe. But in 1812, it faced an enemy unlike any before, Napoleon Bonaparte, the most feared general in the world. What followed would become one of the most legendary military campaigns in history, the French invasion of Russia. Napoleon's Grande Armée, over 600,000 strong, marched into Russia with confidence. His goal? To force Tsar Alexander I into submission. But Russia had a secret weapon, not its soldiers, but its land. As the French advanced, Russian forces retreated, using a scorched earth policy. They burned their own cities, destroyed food supplies, and left nothing behind. Then came Moscow. In September 1812, Napoleon entered the city, expecting a grand victory. Instead, he found it abandoned, and soon, the city was engulfed in flames. Russian forces had set their own capital on fire rather than let the French use it. With no food, no shelter, and a brutal winter setting in, Napoleon had no choice but to retreat. The journey back to France was a disaster. Starvation, disease, and relentless Russian attacks wiped out his army. Of the 600,000 men who invaded, fewer than 100,000 survived. It was one of the most catastrophic defeats in military history. Russia had emerged victorious, proving that even the greatest empire in Europe could not conquer its vast and unforgiving land. But while Napoleon's invasion had failed, it had exposed a deeper truth. Russia's power was growing, but its future remained uncertain. Following Napoleon's downfall, Russia emerged as one of the key players in European politics, with Tsar Nicholas I at the helm. He inherited a growing empire, but with it came great challenges. Russia was on the brink of transformation. Would it remain an autocratic empire, or could it evolve to meet the changing tides of history? Nicholas I believed in maintaining absolute control. His reign was marked by a rigid enforcement of conservative values and the suppression of dissent. Known for his iron fist rule, he silenced revolts such as the Decembrist Uprising, in which a group of young officers attempted to overthrow the monarchy in 1825. The rebellion was brutally crushed, and its leaders were either executed or exiled. This event would mark the beginning of a period in Russian history where political freedom was restricted, and society remained under the tight grip of the state. At the same time, however, the empire was slowly modernizing. Nicholas recognized that Russia's backwardness in industrialization was a serious concern, but the reforms he initiated were limited in scope. While infrastructure, including railroads, grew at a rapid pace, Russia's rigid feudal system of serfdom still held the vast majority of the population in slavery. By the mid-19th century, as Russia continued to expand and strengthen, the divide between the nobility and the peasantry grew ever starker. The great question loomed. Could Russia continue to balance its immense power with the need for internal reform? The answer, tragically, would come too late for the majority of its citizens. As Russia marched into the latter half of the 19th century, the question of serfdom, which had been a stain on the empire for centuries, became impossible to ignore. The serfs, essentially peasants bound to the land, serving their landlords, made up over 80% of the population, yet lived in conditions akin to slavery. It was in this atmosphere that Tsar Alexander II ascended to the throne in 1855. A progressive ruler in many respects, Alexander II recognized that Russia could not continue to thrive while the majority of its population lived in bondage. In 1861, he issued the Emancipation Edict, freeing over 23 million serfs. It was a monumental step in Russian history, making Alexander II known as the Tsar Liberator. However, while the edict granted freedom, it did not fully provide for the land or the means to prosper. Former serfs often had to pay for their land in installments, which many could not afford. The system remained heavily biased toward the landowners, and many peasants found themselves still trapped in poverty. Despite this, the emancipation was a landmark event that began to alter the social and political structure of Russia. It set the stage for further reforms but also left many dissatisfied. Those hoping for a true revolution in Russian society were disappointed. Alexander II's legacy is one of cautious progress, but it would not be enough to stem the tide of revolutionary change that was beginning to gather. The late 19th and early 20th centuries marked a period of rapid change for Russia, but not all of it was positive. The Russo-Japanese War of 1904–1905 was a catastrophic moment for the Russian Empire. A war that was intended to bolster Russia's standing in the East, instead ended in a devastating defeat. The conflict centered on imperial ambitions in Manchuria and Korea. Both Russia and Japan sought to extend their influence over these territories, but Russia, with its massive military, underestimated the newly emerging power of Japan. The war exposed the weaknesses of the Russian military, its logistical issues, and outdated tactics. The Japanese, on the other hand, were highly organized and technologically advanced, defeating the Russian fleet in both land and naval battles. The shock of this defeat rippled through Russian society. The once invincible Russian Empire had suffered a humiliating blow at the hands of a smaller, seemingly insignificant nation. This defeat sowed the seeds of discontent among the Russian population. Workers, soldiers, and intellectuals began to question the leadership of Tsar Nicholas II. How could a nation so vast and so proud be brought low by such a small power? This embarrassment triggered widespread protests, culminating in the 1905 revolution. While the revolution did not succeed in overthrowing the Tsar, it marked the beginning of a series of reforms that would eventually lead to the collapse of the imperial system. The aftermath of Russia's defeat in the Russo-Japanese War and the failure of the 1905 revolution left the country on the edge of collapse. By 1917, the Russian people were weary of the Tsarist regime, particularly Tsar Nicholas II, who was viewed as weak and out of touch with the needs of his people. The conditions of the First World War only exacerbated the situation. In February 1917, amidst growing food shortages, strikes, and discontent, a series of protests broke out in Petrograd, now St. Petersburg. What began as a peaceful demonstration soon escalated into mass unrest. Soldiers, tired of the war and disillusioned with the Tsar's leadership, sided with the protesters. The pressure became too much for the monarchy to handle. On March 2, 1917, Tsar Nicholas II abdicated the throne, ending over 3 centuries of Romanov rule. This event, known as the February Revolution, led to the establishment of a provisional government. But this government was unstable and unable to address the key issues that had sparked the revolution. As the provisional government struggled, a more radical movement was gaining strength, the Bolsheviks, led by Vladimir Lenin. The stage was set for the October Revolution. The fall of the Romanovs and the end of Imperial Russia marked a new chapter in Russian history. But what would replace the monarchy? Could the Bolsheviks fulfill their promises of peace, land, and bread? The answer would reshape the course of history for Russia and the world. After the October Revolution of 1917, the Bolsheviks seized power, and Russia's imperial era came to an end. Under the leadership of Vladimir Lenin, the country embarked on a radical transformation, shifting from an autocratic monarchy to a communist state. The Bolsheviks promised equality and the end of exploitation, but their rule was not without controversy. Lenin's government moved quickly to establish a single-party state and to withdraw from World War I. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk in 1918 ended Russia's involvement in the war but also saw Russia cede vast territories to Germany. Domestically, the new Soviet government faced fierce opposition, leading to the bloody Russian Civil War between the Red Army, Bolsheviks, and the White Army, a coalition of anti-Bolshevik forces. Despite the chaos, the Bolsheviks triumphed. Lenin's death in 1924, however, triggered a power struggle that would eventually place Joseph Stalin at the helm of the Soviet Union. Under Stalin, the Soviet state was solidified, but at a horrific cost. His regime was marked by purges, forced collectivization, and the death of millions. Stalin's policies would have a profound and lasting impact on the Soviet Union and the world. The Soviet Union, which emerged from the ashes of Tsarist Russia, became one of the 2 superpowers of the 20th century. But as we look back at the history of the Soviet Union, it's important to ask, How did the ideals of Lenin's revolution transform into the totalitarian regime of Stalin? And what legacy does the Soviet Union leave in the modern world? The rise of the Soviet Union under Stalin was just the beginning of Russia's pivotal role on the global stage. When Nazi Germany, led by Adolf Hitler, launched its invasion of the Soviet Union in 1941, the world was plunged into a brutal and totalitarian conflict. The German army, under the guise of Operation Barbarossa, stormed into Soviet territory with the intention of crushing the Soviet Union and establishing a new world order based on fascism. But the Soviet response was fierce. Despite initial losses and widespread destruction, the Red Army fought back, turning the tide of the war in a series of bloody battles. The Battle of Stalingrad, one of the most pivotal moments of World War II, marked a turning point in the war. It was here that the Soviet forces encircled and defeated the German Sixth Army, a decisive blow that shifted momentum in favor of the Allies. The Soviet Union's struggle against the Nazis would be costly. The Soviet Union suffered more casualties during the war than any other country, with an estimated 27 million deaths. Despite the immense human and material cost, the victory was seen as a triumph of resilience and determination. By 1945, the Soviet Union had not only repelled the Nazis but had also expanded its influence across Eastern Europe, creating a new power bloc that would last for decades. What drove the Soviet people to endure such incredible hardship and sacrifice? And how did their victory in World War II reshape the global balance of power? As World War II ended, the Soviet Union emerged as one of the two global superpowers, rivaling the United States for dominance. What followed was a decades-long period of political tension, military rivalry, and ideological conflict known as the Cold War. The Cold War was not fought on the battlefield, but in a series of proxy wars, arms races, and intense political maneuvering. The Soviet Union and the United States each sought to expand their influence around the globe, promoting their respective ideologies, communism and capitalism. This led to significant conflicts in places like Korea, Vietnam, and Afghanistan, where both sides fought to control the fate of nations caught in the middle of this ideological battle. At the heart of the Cold War was the nuclear arms race. Both the United States and the Soviet Union developed vast arsenals of nuclear weapons, leading to a constant fear of global annihilation. The Cuban Missile Crisis in 1962 brought the world to the brink of nuclear war, but the crisis was diffused, and both sides began to engage in diplomatic efforts to reduce tensions. The Cold War would span nearly half a century, fundamentally shaping international relations and having a profound impact on Russia's internal and external politics. But as the Soviet Union struggled with economic issues, domestic discontent, and the weight of its military commitments, cracks in the system began to show. Would the Cold War end with the triumph of one side, or would it lead to the ultimate dissolution of the Soviet Union? By the late 1980s, the Soviet Union was facing internal crises that had been building for years. Economic stagnation, political corruption, and growing dissatisfaction among the population were just a few of the factors that led to the decline of the communist regime. It was at this critical juncture that Mikhail Gorbachev came to power in 1985. Gorbachev introduced reforms aimed at addressing the issues within the Soviet system. His policies of glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring, were intended to allow for greater transparency in government and to modernize the economy. However, these reforms inadvertently opened the door to greater criticism of the government, and the Soviet Union's already fragile political structure began to unravel. The turning point came in 1991 when a failed coup by hardline communists attempted to reverse Gorbachev's reforms. This event accelerated the collapse of the Soviet Union. On December 26, 1991, the Soviet Union officially ceased to exist, and the Russian Federation emerged as an independent nation. The fall of the Soviet Union marked the end of the Cold War and the conclusion of an era that had lasted for nearly 70 years. But the aftermath of the Soviet collapse left Russia with numerous challenges: economic instability, a loss of global influence, and the task of redefining its identity in the post-Soviet world. How would Russia navigate this new reality, and what role would it play on the global stage? The fall of the Soviet Union marked the end of an era, but it also opened a new chapter for Russia. After decades of Soviet rule and Cold War tensions, the Russian Federation had to confront the complexities of rebuilding a nation from the ground up. Economic challenges, political reforms, and a quest for national identity were just a few of the hurdles that Russia faced in the post-Soviet world. As we've explored, Russia's history is one of resilience, transformation, and conflict. From the formation of Kievan Rus to the expansion of the Russian Empire, the rise of the Soviet superpower, and the eventual collapse of the USSR, Russia has been at the center of global events that shaped the modern world. Today, Russia continues to play a pivotal role in global politics, navigating its post-Soviet identity and asserting its place in a rapidly changing world. But what does the future hold for Russia? Can it redefine itself as a modern global power, or will it remain tied to its imperial and Soviet past? Only time will tell, but one thing is certain: Russia's story is far from over. If you found this exploration of Russia's complex history fascinating, stay tuned for more in-depth documentaries from the Great Chronicles, where we continue to uncover how the past shapes the present and influences the future. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, so you don't miss out on the next chapter of history.